This happened a couple of months ago when I was home alone. I live in a flat that only has 3 floors and it doesn't have a lift, so if you live in the 3rd floor you have to walk all your way up the stairs. This situation happened at midday while I was chilling at home and my mom was picking my sister up from school, so that meant that I had to let in a man who stops by every Thursday selling water containers. The thing is that he is supposed to deliver the containers by 2 p.m., the time my mom specifically told him to be here because otherwise no one is home, but on this day he arrived at 12 p.m. He rings the doorbell, I tell him on the intercom we need 2 containers and go downstairs. Once you go downstairs, there is a really long hallway until you get to the front door of the building. I greet him and he says, "Well, hello there," kind of amused. I make some small talk and give him the money, to which he tells me to not worry because he will take the containers upstairs. I tell him that I can handle it, but he keeps on insisting. While we are going upstairs, he starts to ask me questions like how old I am, why I wasn't at school. Red flags went immediately off. I answered that I was about to go to work, so I definitely don't go to school. I felt so uncomfortable and vulnerable, it was horrible. He places the containers in front of my door, so I told him, "Well, let me walk you back to the door downstairs," and what he answered still makes me mad as hell. "Oh, I wouldn't mind to be stuck here with you. Are you kidding me?" As if that wasn't creepy enough, he then asked where my mom was. "She is inside helping my dad," I lied. This man could be my dad and he was hitting on a woman he thought was a schoolgirl. It really couldn't get any more disgusting. That walk on the long hallway was the slowest I had ever had. I couldn't wait for him to get out of my building. I was shocked, mad, and felt dirty. I don't know why. I said bye. He had the nerve to kind of hug me, and I shut the door on his face. I basically ran up until I felt safe in my flat, which I didn't. I was turning on the shower tap when my doorbell rang not once, but 5 times, and not the one downstairs, yes, the one upstairs. I locked myself in the bathroom until my mom came back and I blurted out what had happened. You know what the worst thing is? Besides the way this creepy man behaved, it's that my mom told me I was overreacting. I was so angry and disappointed that I didn't talk to her until I came home late at night. I told her to be extra careful if my 12-year-old sister finds herself in this situation, to not open the door to this man under any circumstance, and after that she told me I was right. A middle-aged man with good intentions wouldn't assume you go to school, ask you where your parents are, and tell you that he would like to be stuck in the building with you. He still comes every Thursday at 12 p.m. despite my mom telling him there's no one at home. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was in the middle of the night at my house. My dad would work the graveyard shift at his work. Since it was the weekend, I had stayed up most of the night. It was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad had told me to lock the doors and to go to sleep, which I did. I went to my room and finally went to sleep, but only for about an hour. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake. After taking a few moments to process what I heard, I decided it was probably just my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he just forgot something. Me being really exhausted, I knew he had a house key on him, so I just told myself he'd unlock the door himself. But the knocking continued. It was pretty creepy. Then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped. And then it started again, but at a different location. Someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to assure myself it was my dad. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him. I felt pretty freaked out, so I wasn't answering the door. If anything, my dad would call me to open the door on my phone, which was next to me. The knocking started again at another window. I was terrified now. Too scared to get up and check who was out there. The knocking wasn't stopping, and the next thing I know, the knocking moved to my front door at a harsher level too. That's when it hit me that I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't scream or talk or move any muscle. My heart was dropping as the knocking moved to another window closer and closer to my bedroom window where my curtains were see-through. I still could not move. I didn't know what to do or say. I could only stay out as my fear consumed me. I moved my eyes over to the window and my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through my window. A tall man with a dark ski mask. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly. I tried to scream, but nothing came out of me. I closed my eyes and started telling myself it's not real. Over and over again. I opened my eyes and there's no one there. I sighed a relief until I heard a loud whisper tell me, "I'll cut you." Everything suddenly stopped. I couldn't finally move again not long after. I really couldn't sleep anymore that night. It didn't feel like a dream. I've never experienced sleep paralysis before. And everything felt so real. I don't know what had happened, but I pray I'll never have to experience that again. It was one of the most frightening moments in my life that I've ever dealt with. I think it was real. I was home alone that day, so nobody could back me up. But the following morning, I asked my dad when he came back from work if he came back earlier that day and knocked on my doors and windows. He didn't. This happened several years ago when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We had recently moved into a 2-bedroom house and set to work turning it into a home. We turned the back bedroom into an office as the house only had the one bathroom and it could only be reached through this bedroom. We would have people crash on our sofa pretty regularly and didn't fancy them having to traipse through our own bedroom to get to the loo in the middle of the night. So we'd been living there for roughly 1 month when this event occurred. My ex was out with work colleagues and I was home alone. I'd spent the early evening watching TV and eating takeout. A couple of times I heard some strange noises, but whenever I would try and zone in on them to figure out what the hell it was, it would stop. It got later and I decided to go upstairs and use the computer for a little while before heading to bed. At this point in time, we hadn't had our phone line installed and I was still on a pay and go phone which had run out of credit. I basically had no way to communicate with anyone whilst I was in the house that night. So I'm sitting in the back bedroom with only a small table lamp on that barely forms a glow whilst I'm typing away on my laptop when I heard noises again. It started as a light rattling noise, really faint to the point I had to strain to see if I was really hearing it or imagining it. I shut my music off and tried to figure out what it was. I went into our bedroom and looked down to the front door, nobody there. Go back into the back bedroom, but can't see much out of the window. We had a small yard with a high brick wall and a solid wooden gate with nothing to cast any light. But from what little I could see, there was nothing out back either. I sat back down and switched the music back on. Maybe 10 minutes later, I hear this eerie screeching sound like metal on metal, again very faint. As if whatever was making it was trying desperately to be quiet. I was getting more than a little freaked out by this point, so I went into our bedroom to retrieve this heavy iron rod that we'd found in the back of the built-in wardrobe. I didn't switch on any lights as I didn't know what was going on and didn't want to alert any possible intruder to my location inside the house. Remember, I had no way of calling anyone and I was getting more than a little concerned someone might actually be in my house. I made my way back into the office/bedroom and closed the door as quietly as possible before bolting it and lodging a chair under the handle. Nothing more happens for a good 20 minutes or so. I start to feel a little foolish for letting myself get worked up and put it down to it being my first night alone in the house. but I don't switch the music back on this time. Which was lucky because I started to hear a sound like two people whispering. Both male voices. They didn't sound like they were coming from inside the house though. I had the window open ever so slightly and the sound seemed to be floating in from there. I headed into the bathroom to see if I can get a better look into the alley that the house backed onto. The room I was in and the bathroom formed an L around the yard with the bathroom extending further out. I climbed up onto the ledge and inched the window open to try and see out into the alley. I couldn't see a thing, but the whispering was louder and coming from directly behind my gate. I couldn't hear whole sentences, but heard enough to surmise whoever these men were, they'd seen us move in and had seen we had quite a lot of valuable equipment, guitars, computers, my DSLR, TV, games consoles, etc. I imagine they'd seen I was home alone and been waiting for me to go asleep to try and get into the house. I stayed perched there for what felt like an eternity until what seemed like the loudest thud in the world echoed up to me. They'd grown tired of trying to be stealthy, and one or both of them were throwing themselves at my gate trying to break it down. I could see it shuddering under the blows and could only imagine how large these men must be. I'm a tiny girl, and at that point weighed somewhere around 105 pounds. As you can imagine, I was white with terror as I watched my gate groan under the stress. I sat clutching that iron rod trying to think where I could hide from them. Suddenly a glaring light blinded me. At first I panicked and dropped out of sight, thinking they were shining a torch at the back of the house, but then I heard barking and shouting. I peeked out again and saw the house, which was across the alley from us, had a floodlight installed, and it was illuminating both their own yard, mine, and the alley with light. I heard grumbling and cursing, and then 2 sets of footsteps hurrying down the alley. I stayed locked in that back bedroom until my ex-boyfriend drunkenly rolled in at about 4 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and when I went into the yard in the morning, my gate was hanging by one hinge, allowing easy access from the alley. When I looked at the back of it, the keyhole was covered in scratches as if someone had tried to force the lock. If they hadn't woken the house behind us, I dread to think what could have happened.